Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Rain fell gently on Springfield that morning, giving the streets a melancholy air. In the brand-new lobby of Harrison Motors, gleaming cars gleamed under the fluorescent lights, attracting the attention of every passerby. Yet, amidst this luxury, an elderly man entered, Mr. Samuel Johnson, 72, in a sober but elegant suit, hat in hand, walking slowly but dignified. His eyes, behind his glasses, observed every detail, every forced smile of the employees. Samuel approached the first car on display, a rare model he'd long coveted. "Hello. I'd like some information on this car, please," he said calmly. But his approach was met with awkward stares and hushed murmurs. Kyle, a cocky young salesman, raised an eyebrow and sneered at his colleagues. "A grandpa wants to see a car, this will be fun." Samuel sensed the disdain in the air. He leaned slightly toward the counter, but Jessica, another saleswoman, looked away and continued tapping away at the computer. Brandon, meanwhile, exchanged a knowing look with Kyle and laughed. "Are you just trying to annoy us, or are you actually looking for a car?" Kyle asked mockingly. Samuel's heart sank, not with anger, but with cold determination. He said nothing, simply nodded and left, leaving behind a lobby where luxury shone as brightly as the arrogance of its employees. But behind that calm face, a thought was brewing: these young men would soon regret their arrogance. For Samuel Johnson was no mere vulnerable retiree. He was a savvy businessman, a patient strategist, and he had revenge on his mind. As he walked away into the rain, his gaze swept across the hall one last time, shining with a silent promise: "One day you will understand what it is to be humiliated, and when that day comes, I will be the master of the game." At home in his large, simple but refined house, Samuel Johnson stood by the window, watching the rain trickle down the Springfield sidewalks. His gaze showed no blind anger, only cold determination. He still remembered Kyle's laughter, Jessica's indifference, and Brandon's open contempt. Every detail was etched in his memory. Samuel placed his coffee cup on the table and took out a leather notebook filled with figures and financial notes. He wasn't an impulsive man. No, he planned every move with precision. He knew exactly what it took to turn humiliation into resounding revenge. He began by reviewing his finances, investments, companies he owned, available cash. Then he made a plan: a complete purchase of Harrison Motors, a complete change of management, and a radical reorganization of personnel. But he knew he had to proceed discreetly. A hasty move would have aroused suspicion and spoiled his plan. The thought of revenge made him smile. He could already imagine the surprise on Kyle and his colleagues' faces when they discovered that the man they had ignored was now their superior. He saw himself transforming the company into a model of discipline and respect, where arrogance would be punished and humility rewarded. Samuel picked up the phone and contacted his lawyer, Mr. Daniel Reed, a loyal and methodical man. He gave him his instructions: monitor Harrison Motors, prepare the necessary documents for a discreet takeover, and wait for his approval. Soon, Samuel murmured, "They'll understand what it means to underestimate someone." As he watched the rain fall again, Samuel felt a shiver of satisfaction run down his spine. Revenge wouldn't just be sweet, it would be perfect, precisely calculated, unforgettable. And when the time came, no one in this compound would laugh again. In the following days, Samuel Johnson immersed himself completely in his plan. Every morning, he pored over Harrison Motors' financial reports, noting flaws in the company's management and employee habits. He knew exactly where to strike to exact his revenge. Samuel contacted his business contacts. Among them were Claire Donovan, an M&A expert, and Thomas Bennett, a consultant specializing in corporate restructuring. Together, they analyzed Harrison Motors' finances and identified all the opportunities for a discreet but comprehensive takeover. Samuel wanted the process to be clean, legal, and unassailable. During this time, he visited the dealership several times, pretending to be just observational visits. He took notes on how the employees treated customers, their attitudes, and when they seemed most arrogant or careless. Every mocking smile, every contemptuous laugh, every haughty look was recorded in his memory, fueling his determination. Samuel knew that the takeover would not be solely financial. He wanted to send a clear message, that no arrogance, no mockery of an elderly person or a customer was acceptable. He was preparing strategies to reorganize the staff and reevaluate their place in the company. Those who had humiliated a simple customer would not survive his reform. One night, alone in his office, he sketched out the detailed plan of the attack. 1. Buy the majority of Harrison Motors shares in a discreet. 2. Announce the news as a complete surprise to the staff. 3. Immediately reorganize the hierarchy and fire those who had been disrespectful. 4. Transforming the business into a service model impeccable and respect for customers. He stood up, walked to the window, and watched the lights of Springfield twinkle in the darkness. Soon, he whispered, they will know the true power of patience and intelligence. His face held an icy calm, but his eyes shone with implacable determination. Samuel was ready. The revenge game had just begun, and no arrogant employee would be spared. A few weeks later, Harrison Motors seemed to be operating as usual. Kyle, Brandon, and Jessica strutted around the lobby, proud of their arrogance and self-confidence. But what they didn't know was that Samuel Johnson had completed his takeover plan. One morning, Mr. Harrison, the dealership manager, received a surprising call. A calm, collected voice came out, "Hello, I'm Samuel Johnson. I've purchased your entire business." Mr. Harrison burst out laughing, "You must be mistaken, it can't be." "Not at all," Samuel replied icily. "As of today, I am the legal owner of Harrison Motors." The shock was immediate. Mr. Harrison tried to protest, but Samuel had prepared everything legally. Every document, every signature, every transaction had been verified by his lawyers. There was no way to contest the takeover. Soon after, Samuel arrived at the dealership for the first time as owner. He walked calmly through the doors, observing every employee. Kyle, still arrogant, looked up from his phone. His lips parted to make a mocking remark, but he stopped when he saw Samuel walking towards him, confident and imposing. Samuel stopped in the center of the hall and said in a calm but authoritative voice, "Hello everyone. I'm Samuel Johnson, the new owner." A heavy silence fell. Brandon dropped his coffee cup, Jessica looked away, and Kyle felt his heart race. They immediately understood that the man they had ignored and humiliated just weeks earlier was now their direct superior. Samuel continues. "Do you remember how some of you treated me? Well, those days are over. Starting today, we're going to radically change the way Harrison Motors operates. Those who don't respect customers or their work will face the consequences." The staff were stunned. Surprise, fear, and shame mingled in their eyes. Samuel had succeeded in the first step of his revenge. He had taken complete control of the company and sent a clear message to those who had been arrogant. As Samuel looked around, a faint smile played on his lips. The true transformation, the one that would teach them the value of respect and humility, was only just beginning. The next morning, Samuel Johnson summoned the entire staff to Harrison Motors' main conference room. The employees arrived nervous and uneasy, already sensing that something was about to change. Kyle, Brandon, and Jessica entered last, exchanging worried glances. The shadow of last week's humiliation still hung over them. Samuel entered calmly, without rushing. Each footstep echoed in the silent room. When he spoke, his voice was firm and measured, and each word seemed to weigh a ton. "Hello, everyone," he began. "You remember me? I'm Samuel Johnson, and you met me a few weeks ago. Some of you have chosen to ignore me, despise me, and even mock me." A shudder ran through the room. Kyle and Brandon's pale faces betrayed their fear. Jessica looked down, knowing her arrogant attitude wouldn't go unnoticed. Samuel continues. "I am now the owner of this company. From this day forward, Harrison Motors will never be the same. Respect, professionalism, and consideration for every customer will be our top priorities. Those who fail to meet these standards will face the consequences. He paused, letting silence fall. Every employee felt the weight of his words. Then, calmly, Samuel added, "I'm not looking to punish for the sake of punishing. I'm looking to create a culture where every customer and every colleague is treated with dignity. Some of you will have to leave this company, and that's a reality you must accept." Kyle tried to protest, "But, we've always done it this way around here." Samuel stared at him. "And that's exactly the problem. This is a thing of the past." At that precise moment, every employee understood that the reorganization would be drastic. Fear and tension mingled with a silent shame. Samuel had planted the first seed of transformation, one that would challenge their arrogance and disrespectful behavior. Samuel concluded the meeting with a sentence that resonated throughout the room. "This company is no longer measured by the wealth of cars on display, but by the human quality of those who work there. You will all learn what it truly means to serve with respect and dignity." The employees left the room, shaken and worried. Some wondered how they would survive this new era, while others were already beginning to reflect on their past behavior. Samuel's revenge was only just beginning, and no one was safe. A few days after the meeting, Harrison Motors was plunged into a palpable atmosphere of tension. Employees walked like they were on eggshells, aware that every move and word could be observed and judged by Samuel Johnson, the company's new strongman. Samuel wasted no time. He began to inspect each employee, assessing their attitude, professionalism, and respect for customers. Kyle, Brandon, and Jessica's mockery and arrogance were no longer acceptable. One morning, Samuel summoned Brandon to his office. Brandon entered, confident and ready to argue, but his confidence melted as soon as he met Samuel's merciless gaze. "Brandon," Samuel began calmly, "your past behavior toward customers and coworkers is unacceptable. Your attitude does not meet Harrison Motors standards. You are hereby terminated, effective immediately." Brandon tried to protest, but it was just a joke. Samuel cut him off. "Respect is not a joke. Joking has a price, and today, that price is your job." A few minutes later, Jessica was also called. She left the room, flushed with shame and stunned. Kyle, meanwhile, was reassigned to menial tasks, such as cleaning the parking lot and organizing inventory under Samuel's watchful eye. The other employees watched these scenes with a mixture of fear and fascination. Samuel's moral was clear: arrogance and disrespect would no longer be tolerated. Every action now had direct and immediate consequences. Word spread quickly through the compound: Samuel Johnson was not just a landlord, but an impartial and strict judge. The mockery, laughter, and contempt had given way to rigorous discipline and respect imposed by fear and admiration. For Samuel, this step was essential. He didn't just want to punish those who had humiliated him, he wanted to change the entire culture of the company. And to do that, he knew that the first layoffs and reassignments were just the beginning. As the sun set over Springfield, Harrison Motors was no longer the same. The employees understood that every action would now be scrutinized, and that Samuel's revenge wasn't just personal, it was the beginning of a radical and inevitable transformation. With the first layoffs and reassignments behind him, Samuel Johnson knew that true transformation at Harrison Motors could only come by changing the company's entire culture. He then called all remaining employees to a series of mandatory training sessions on customer service, respect, and professionalism. The training room, usually used for internal meetings, was redesigned for the occasion. Posters read, "Respect is our driving force," and "Every customer counts." The nervous employees settled in silently, aware that this session would not be a simple routine. Samuel entered calmly, his icy gaze sweeping the room. He began with a sentence that sent shivers through the room. "You have witnessed what happens when someone is ignored or despised. Today, we will learn to treat every customer and every colleague with dignity. There will be no more favoritism, mockery, or indifference." He then invited elderly customers and respected members of the community to share their experiences with Harrison Motors. Stories of employee misconduct and ignorance were recounted with emotion, causing embarrassment and shame among those who had been arrogant. Kyle, who had been reassigned to menial duties, was held up as an example. Samuel calmly explained. Kyle, your arrogance has cost you your status and privileges. But there is a chance for redemption, if you prove your commitment to these values. Tensions rose as Samuel announced regular evaluations for all employees. Every behavior would now be observed, noted, and discussed. Those who failed to demonstrate respect and professionalism would be immediately fired. By the end of the day, the company was no longer the same. Employees left the training room with a mixture of fear and respect for Samuel. The lesson was clear: Harrison Motors was no longer a place where arrogance and disrespect could thrive. Samuel stood alone in his office, gazing out at the empty lobby. A faint, satisfied smile crossed his face. The transformation was underway. Revenge was no longer just a matter of punishment, it was a total reconstruction, a metamorphosis in which humility and respect would finally replace vanity and arrogance. Samuel Johnson knew that Harrison Motors' transformation shouldn't remain internal. To ensure his message was understood by everyone, he decided to make his revenge public and exemplary. He organized a special event in the dealership's main hall, inviting customers, local journalists, and members of the community. On the day of the event, the hall shone under the lights, decorated for the occasion. The cars gleamed, but the focus was on Samuel, standing in the center, calm and imposing. The remaining staff, nervous, stood apart. Those who had been arrogant showed a mixture of fear and shame. Samuel began by briefly recounting his initial experience at the dealership, the rain that day, the indifference, the mockery, and the humiliation he had endured. Reporters took careful notes. Customers listened, shocked by the way employees had treated an elderly customer. Then Samuel announced the changes: layoffs, reassignments, and mandatory training for the remaining staff. He emphasized that the dealership now had a new mission: respect, professionalism, and excellence in customer service. To mark the moment, he brought Kyle out in front of everyone. Kyle, humiliated but aware that his redemption was still possible, looked down. Samuel calmly explained to the assembly. Here is someone who learned the hard way that arrogance and contempt have consequences. But there is always a chance to change, to improve. The event was covered by the local media, and soon the story spread throughout Springfield. A humiliated elderly man had bought the company and transformed its arrogant employees. Samuel's revenge was not merely financial or personal, it was public, resounding, and exemplary. At the end of the day, Samuel stood alone in the empty lobby. The evening light filtered through the windows, and he smiled softly. The employees had understood, and so had the community. His lesson in respect and discipline had been driven home forcefully and intelligently, and no one would ever forget that day. The weeks following the public event were marked by a palpable change at Harrison Motors. The remaining employees, still reeling from the layoffs and reforms, began to reflect on their behavior. Some, like Kyle, realized that their past arrogance had almost led to their job loss. Samuel Johnson wasn't just looking to punish, he wanted to encourage redemption and self-improvement. He introduced a system of daily behavior monitoring, where every employee had to demonstrate their commitment to customer respect and professionalism. Those who showed progress received encouragement, increased responsibilities, and even symbolic rewards for their transformation. Kyle, initially skeptical and arrogant, began to change. He worked hard, listened attentively to customers, and learned to collaborate with his colleagues without arrogance. Samuel, observing his efforts, decided to support him. Kyle, I see you're making a real effort. Keep it up and you'll regain the confidence you've lost. Jessica, for her part, demonstrated that she, too, could change. She apologized to customers for her past behavior and fully engaged in customer service training. Even Brandon, who had been fired, requested a re-evaluation and showed a sincere desire to make amends. Samuel then realized that his strategy was working. The initial fear had paved the way for a real inner change. Harrison Motors, once a place of arrogance and indifference, was gradually becoming an example of respect and professionalism. The dealership lobby, once silent and tense, now resonated with a new dynamism. Customers felt the difference, employees helped one another, and the company's reputation improved day by day. Samuel, observing this transformation, knew that his revenge was no longer just about power or punishment, it had become a lesson in life and justice. As the sun set, Samuel watched the employees work with seriousness and respect, a slight smile on his lips. Revenge had served its purpose. Those who had humiliated the elderly man had not only learned their lesson, but the entire company had been transformed for the better. With Harrison Motors now transformed, Samuel Johnson began to see the impact of his strategy on the community and in the media. Journalists who had covered the public event visited the dealership to witness the change. Customers, for their part, shared their satisfaction. The service was now impeccable, and the culture of respect Samuel had established was palpable in every interaction. The remaining staff, aware of the progress they had made, worked with seriousness and humility. Kyle, who had begun to redeem himself, was congratulated by Samuel in front of all his colleagues. "Do you see what it means to learn from your mistakes?" he said calmly. Kyle got it, and so can you. The local media published glowing articles about the dealership's transformation. Harrison Motors, from arrogance to excellence, the old man who changed a company's culture. Samuel's reputation grew in Springfield and beyond. He was now known not only for his financial success, but also for his ability to command respect and discipline with intelligence and fairness. Some former employees, witnessing this transformation, regretted their past behavior. Brandon, who had been fired, acknowledged his mistakes and wrote to Samuel asking for a second chance. Samuel, true to his vision of redemption, agreed to meet with him to discuss his potential return, on the condition that his behavior be impeccable. The dealership lobby, once a place of arrogance and contempt, was now filled with professionalism and respect. Customers walked in and immediately felt the difference. Samuel's initial revenge had turned into a moral and social victory. Sitting in his office, Samuel contemplated the scene with satisfaction. The revenge had been perfect. Not only had those who had humiliated him been confronted with their mistakes, but the entire culture of Harrison Motors had been transformed. And as the evening lights illuminated the lobby, Samuel knew that his lesson would be memorable for all to see. A few months had passed since Samuel Johnson's acquisition of Harrison Motors. The company, once marked by arrogance and indifference, was now a model of respect, efficiency, and professionalism. Customers were returning not only to buy cars, but also to see the difference in service. The employees, transformed by the experience, had learned to collaborate with humility and diligence. Kyle had regained his position with responsibility, Jessica demonstrated sincere commitment every day, and even Brandon, after a re-evaluation, was reinstated under strict conditions of impeccable behavior. Samuel had succeeded in transforming not only a company, but lives. The dealership lobby now echoed with genuine laughter and businesslike conversation. The cars shone, yes, but it was respect and dignity that truly illuminated Harrison Motors. Samuel stood in his office, observing the work of his employees and the steady stream of satisfied customers. A faint smile appeared on his lips. His revenge, calculated and methodical, had been a complete success. He had confronted those who had humiliated him, changed the company culture, and left a legacy of respect and excellence. In local newspapers and on social media, the story of Harrison Motors and the elderly man who had taken his revenge became an inspiring example. Perseverance, patience, and intelligence could triumph over arrogance and injustice. And as the sun set over Springfield, Samuel stepped away from the office to walk the lobby one last time. He greeted his employees, exchanged a few words with customers, and, in an almost solemn silence, realized his mission was accomplished. Revenge was no longer simply personal, it had created lasting change, an example of justice and respect that no one would forget. The curtain fell on Harrison Motors, transformed and victorious, and on Samuel Johnson, the man who had proven that even a single, ignored customer could change the course of an entire universe when he had the patience, intelligence, and determination to do so.